Another day back in the garage. Here's the B. Last episode we got the engine in, the transmission in, the headers bolted up, the front drive hooked up, carburetor on, radiator in. On this episode we're going to work on the axles and the wheels. So I'm going to pull the front drums off, grease the wheel bearings, check the brakes. We're going to put right hand thread studs on the left hand side of the car because they come factory with left hand on the left hand side. So we're going to pull the axles out of the back, put new studs in the left hand side on there. We're also going to pull the diff out, check it over, make sure it's all good, change the oil in it, get that put back in, grease the bearings in the rear as well. So we're going to get that all done, and we're going to keep hammering on the drive line. So I have the drive shaft and everything in. Buddy Dal hooked me up with some electric fans, got some gauges, an intake hat, and also have an electronic ignition conversion kit. So here's the box and the wiring. I already have the distributor in the engine, so we're going to go ahead and build some plug wires and get that all routed and set this up. And hopefully by the end of this video, we get this thing fired up with the key. So let's go ahead and get right to it. Got the rad bolted back in with the electric fans. So just have to wire those fans up. I've also been messing around with a lot of little things here. We got all these brackets painted, springs put on. This is a setup for the kickdown cable for the transmission and the throttle cable. So all that stuff is painted and bolted up, which is nice. This is that little Edelbrock bracket, the 1481. It brings the factory throttle linkage piece. You can bolt it on here, and it just bolts onto the Edelbrock carb. So it is all hooked up and working awesome. I have new heater core ports here. This car has really low miles, but I still don't know what's in that heater core, and plus it's been sitting for like 40 years. So we're gonna pull that heater core box out right now. I think there's a couple lines on the top for vent flaps and maybe a little bit of wiring for some resistors for the blower motor. So we'll get that heater box pulled out, kind of tear it apart a bit, give it a good clean, make sure there's no mice and everything. We'll also flush the heater core out, make sure it's not leaking, and then slap it back in and get those heater core lines on. So let's get to it. Anyway, here's the heater box on the inside. So we have a cable right here. We got to disconnect the cable up here, which I've already disconnected. And then we'll have to pull these heater vent tubes off. And I'm sure there's some wiring. There's also a bracket right there. So let's go ahead and get all that stuff disconnected and see if we can get this box slid right out of here and have a better look. This is all in extremely good shape. I noticed that this must be a little bit of coolant, so we might want to get a new heater core. And yeah, other than that, everything looks great. Let's go ahead and buff all the rust and paint all these pieces so it's nice and clean, the air is fresh. And we'll clean up the foams as best as we can, but everything is pretty much brand new. All right, guys, day 8,000 in the garage. The heater box is completely cleaned out. I'm gonna give it a little bit of spray with spray 9. I've also buffed the rust and a little bit of surface rust off these tin panels, and we've tested the blower motor, and everything is in really good shape. So I put a little paint on these. I pressure test the heater core. It is good. And anyway, we just got to assemble this thing. I've also shoved the vacuum up into the cowl up in here, and there's a lot of pine needles and stuff, so sucked all that out. I pulled the canister off the driver's side with the little vent pull canister and cleaned that out as well. This thing is going to get some fresh cab interior air. Let's go ahead and put this box back together. All right, the heater box is totally together, so let's get this thing slapped back in. Back in here, another day, taken too many days, but heater box is totally in, all hooked up. I'm gonna run some heater core lines, but right now I picked up a couple fuel tank bolts. So I'm going to disconnect the fuel tank, cut those old bolts, get the tank down. It looks clean, but I wanna get it out of there, pull the sending unit out just to double check everything, and then make sure everything's good. And if it's good, I got another seal, so we'll just pop everything back together, clean it up. Fingers crossed, maybe find the build sheet underneath. Maybe not, but yeah, that's like the last thing, and then I'll blow the fuel line out, make sure it's all good. If it's good, fuel pump on. Also, I got the car registered and insured, so we got our classic plate here. We'll get that thing bolted on and hit the streets. So, all right, stay tuned. I pulled the sending unit out, and here it is. It is literally brand new. Gave it a little bit of brake clean. Even the rubber is still good. So I cleaned up the lock ring. Here's the actual tank. I pulled the mat off, and you can see the tank is just in incredible shape. Along with the trunk pan is literally bare metal. So I got some paint here. We're gonna paint the trunk pan. We're gonna paint the top of the tank. And here's the factory rubber vinyl liner that goes on top of the tank to the body. And that thing's in incredible shape too. So we're gonna just slap this thing back together with some new fuel lines and new breather vent lines. Okay, so we're getting lots of stuff buttoned up underneath here. As you can see, I put the heater core lines on and have them routed and hooked up. The wiring is an absolute disaster. I filled the tranny up, just doing all the little stuff. Have the plug wires kind of semi-routed just for a test fire. But right now I'm working on wiring the electronic distributor, and it's an electronic ignition conversion kit. So the distributor is in over here on the bench. I have the actual ECM module right here. We also have the wiring harness and then the instructions. So it's a pretty basic setup, as you can see here. Electronic ignition box on, the new resistor on, we have an electronic alternator regulator on, and a new alternator. So I have all the wiring just kind of taped together here, tied up for now. So got the coil wired, the two wires that go to the distributor wired, it's looking pretty good. There's a few extra wires here. One's for wash fluid tank, one's for the horn circuit, which goes up here. So I'm gonna run them along the fender and get a new wash fluid tank that mounts here from factory. We got the plugs in, spark plug boots on because the headers are so big, and as you can see, they're just rough in here. So I'm gonna go ahead and tie them up all nice here and then crimp on some spark plug boots. Another thing we did is finish the linkage. So got the spring set up there on the kickdown along with the throttle. So showed a little bit of that. Coils mounted. This thing is looking good. We're getting so close. One thing is I pulled the tank out, as you guys seen, kind of went through it, painted it. It looks awesome, but before I was doing any of that, I did try to blow the factory 5/16 fuel line out, and it is plugged with rust. So I picked up this large coil of 5/16 tubing, and we're gonna try our best to recreate the factory one. So let's go ahead and get underneath there, cut the old one out, and try to build it as close as we can. And also a flat tire, so sick. Here's the factory fuel line. As you can see, it's actually not that complicated at all. It's got this one little zigzag in it where it goes through the actual front torsion bar frame rail, but pretty minor. So let's take my tubing, lay it next to this thing, and just start bending it. All right, guys, we got it. So I don't even use a tool to bend this stuff, and as you can tell, the bends do not pinch over. They're perfectly round, so I just go ahead and use my hand and kind of pull and stretch as I'm bending it, and it seems to be fine with no crimping. So there you go. There's one end. I like to tape it together as I go to keep it in one piece. Around the bends, I got a new clamp I'm gonna put right here, and all we got to do is just trim right here, and that's where the rubber hose goes to the tank. So I like to put a filter between the tank and the line, and I also put a filter between the line and the carburetor. So this is great. Let's get this thing cut off and slapped in. Okay guys, we got an absolutely insane amount of stuff done on the car in the last few days, and we are pretty much ready to fire. So I'm gonna put a little jerry can of gas in, crank this thing over, get some oil pressure on our gauges, and fire it right up. So fingers crossed, here we go. Yep, go ahead. Subscribe to the channel.